Railway Conversations with Doc Frank.
Hi, this is Doc Frank, host of the Railway Conversations podcast. Thank you for listening. My guest on today's episode is Stephen Allday from Sydney in Australia. Steve has been a long-term friend of mine, previous colleague from the old Siemens times in the UK. Quite recently, I noticed that Steve had finished what he called a project Self-Esteem. And I found this quite intriguing. It is about gathering a number of accreditations of professional bodies in the railway industry, not just the typical ones that most people do. For signaling engineers, it's the IRSE, the Institution of Railway Signaling Engineers. And then if you work in Australia, it's normally Engineers Australia as well. You're trying to get a status as a chartered professional engineer. But Steve went quite a few steps further. And this episode is mainly around this, why he did it, what the purpose of it was, what the benefits are, and how it all fits together to a really well-rounded accreditation inside the railway industry. We are talking a lot about railway operations, about the role of infrastructure in the railway, about understanding and empathy for disciplines that may not be your own, and towards the end also about inspiration. And I hope that you find the entire episode inspiring, and as usual, I hope you enjoy it. Hi, it's Doc Frank here. Real quick, I want to let you know about one of the best CBTC trainings in the world, if not the very best, but you always need to be careful with superlatives. It's the CBTC Kickstarter online course. It consists of 30 video lessons. That's the 3 with the 0. In total, over 11 hours of training content, talking about everything from the basics of CBTC, current standards, the benefits of CBTC, the key functionality of it, the supply industry, application tips and tricks, lessons learned, do's and don'ts, case studies, arguably the most comprehensive training that you can find anywhere on the topic of CBTC. A few additional things that make learning easier for you that you may not find on any other online courses. One of them being an immersion plan that helps guiding you through the training course and progress it in a finite period of time instead of just having it sit there for months and months on end. There is access to an online study group where you can connect with other students who are doing that training course at the time and form learning groups. There will be live coaching calls once every 2 weeks. And after the training, you will not be on your own. There is an alumni community that allows you to ask questions about the course content on an ongoing basis. So it's basically education for life. You can inform yourself about this training course and register to it on my training portal, which is docfranktraining.podia.com/CBTC Kickstarter -online 2023. I repeat that, docfranktraining.podia.com/CBTC Kickstarter -online 2023. I look forward to seeing you at that training. And until then, please enjoy my upcoming episode of this podcast. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Frank. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
You're very welcome. We've known each other for a long time, I think more than 20 years. It started off in the UK. And then we kept in touch here in Australia. We did some work together on Sydney Metro for a short while. I remember it had to do with mechanical gap fillers, and maybe we can have a little chat about that later on as well. But what intrigued me most recently were a few posts that you did on LinkedIn with regards to what you called Project Self-Esteem. What is this and how did you get to do this?
Yeah, more than happy to talk about it. I think if you've read the post, it was a kind of a very personal thing to me, and I was driven to do it very much out of, as it actually says, self-esteem. If you look at my background, I've been in the railway industry 50 plus years, so it's been going a while now. And when I first started, I didn't go to university. I came from the Fenlands of the UK, and to be honest, I was probably most people in that area were expected to go on the land and work on the land. I didn't want to do that, so I decided that I wanted to do something different. So I wanted to become an electrician. So I went to college for a year and got my City and Guilds. I was then fortunate to get effectively an apprenticeship into the railway industry. They called them probationers at the time, which sounds terrible, doesn't it? But effectively it was an apprenticeship, and with that apprenticeship, I was allowed to go to what they call day release. So it meant 1 day a week I was released to go to college for a day and a night, and then build up on my City and Guilds. So I ended up with a trade effectively. I became an electrician, more electrical, and it was more to do with installation type work. And I saw that one through, and then I was driven to wanting to continue as a young lad. And so I've got my ONC and my HNC, and eventually endorsements on that, and got what we call a CEI Part 2, which is the equivalent to a degree. And that felt very good. But in the background, obviously, my career, I was no longer then an apprentice, and I went into the design office. My background is comms initially, though it was at S&T at the time. And then I actually went into various other roles, which became management roles. And my career progressed through the UK and both in the public sector, and then as when we first met in the private sector when I was running the business for Siemens. And all the way through that, though I'd got the qualification, I never really did anything with it other than, I had it and it was great. Until I came to Australia. And when I came to Australia, the first thing that happened was you had to show your competency. And so that particularly became the case when I was in Sydney Metro. And lo and behold, I couldn't find my certificates at all. They were long gone. And I wrote to City and Guilds and tried to get a hold of them. I got some, but I didn't get them all. So I've got a mix of them. Again, it didn't really concern me too much until we're now starting to have, in Queensland, I think you'll be aware that they've got these, you've got to be registered, and I think it's the same in Victoria, on the engineers register.
It is.
So I applied for that, and at the same time, I had a conversation with a few people that said, well, I'm sorry, but your qualifications aren't recognised because they predate the Washington Accord and the Dublin Accord, and so therefore, we don't recognise you as an engineer. And I thought,
what? Okay.
Yeah. So but then I thought, I'm going to do this, but I'm going to do it for me, because I know I've done all these things, and I've worked in many different roles in the railway industry, and to be honest, the railways is my life and blood. I love the railways. If you cut me, I bleed railways. It's a part of my DNA, I think. And so I wanted to get some recognition, but mainly, as I said, for me, and for to be recognised in the industry for what I've done in the past. So the first thing I did was set out to become a fellow of the Institute of Railway Signalling Engineers. Now, this all started back in August of last year. And I also set myself a target of a year to do these things. Okay. So I applied for the fellowship of the Institute of Railway Signalling Engineers, got that. Had obviously.
Were you a member before of the IRSE?
No. I went straight into fellow.
Okay, so you basically applied for membership in the IRSE and you applied straight for the fellowship. All right.
Yes. Yeah. Which was a bit bold, I suppose, but I did it.
I'll tell you my story in a moment. Yeah, very similar to yours, I must say.
So, I mean, clearly you've got to have sponsors and you've got to be able to demonstrate what you've done in the past, to demonstrate that you are competent and have operated at that level.
And you needed sponsors as well, right? I think for fellowship, you need 2 other fellows to sponsor your application.
Yeah, I did indeed, yes. Unfortunately, I know a few people in the industry that I've worked with over the time that are fellows of the institute.
Just a few, yeah.
Just a few. Yeah. So it was. I actually enjoyed it. I won't say it was easy because you actually, there is a lot of effort you have to put into doing it. But because I was driven and I wanted to do it, it made you start to think about some of the things you've done. And the other thing it's really driven me for is to recognise that in the background, you continue to educate yourself of what's going on in the industry, but you never actually think about that. You just do it. But when you're starting to apply for fellowship, you actually have to write down what you've done and some of the things that's helped in that. And I mean, one of them that I mentioned in my application for the IRSE was the very thing you talked about, the mechanical gap fill and the obstacle detection systems on the metro system here in Sydney. So I then, once I did that, the next important thing for me was to actually get my chartered engineer. So I applied for that again through the IRSE because they have the ability to do that. And that again, I actually achieved that in December of last year. Now, bizarrely enough, initially when I applied for it, they rejected me saying, no, you haven't got the qualifications. Therefore, we don't. You need to be looking at maybe something lower than that for the time being. So I applied for the lower membership, and then when the assessors got hold of it and they had all the information, they actually contacted and said, we think you should be going for a chartered engineer. So I said, well, I wanted to in the first place. So I did. I gave them a bit more information, and that resulted in the chartered engineer. So that was for me. I was like a Cheshire cat for a while because that was really special to me to actually get that recognition of being a chartered engineer and a fellow of what is the home institute for me, railway signalling engineers.
Yes.
They do it. Yeah, I mean, because they do allow comms people in as well.
I think the charter status here in Australia is the, and with all respect to the IRSE, but I think for being an engineer in Australia, the charter status is the real big one. Yeah, because that's the door opener for all your state registrations in Queensland, in Victoria. So basically, all they want is a proof that you are registered nationally as a chartered professional engineer, and then it's basically just a rubber stamping thing with like annual payments. So yeah, I wasn't too pleased when those states came up with this, because I think, well, if I'm already nationally registered, which I can prove, which anybody can check online, then what's the point in having an additional state registration, which basically says nothing other than this guy is nationally registered, and that's all it took. Plus, he has paid his dues. Yeah. So.
Yep.
Yeah.
Which you have to do every 4 years as well, Frank, because they also, it's renewable.
No, every year. Every year. In Queensland, I'm paying every year. In Victoria, I just got my registration, the first one, just before Christmas. I was probably one of the first ones in Victoria. And I don't know, but I could well imagine that they ask for money also every year or so. It remains to be seen.
That's right. It's annual, but I think you also have to get re-registered every as well. On top of that, I think there's an additional, I think, but I'll find out shortly.
Well, I only re-registration. I only know the process from Queensland, and it basically just asks more or less: are you still chartered? Are you still nationally registered? Yes, 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 and then all good. And then, of course, there are the typical legal things. Whether I have had any cases of I don't know, my professional associations being cancelled because of professional misbehavior, anything like that. So the typical things. No, I haven't been convicted. I haven't done anything wrong, and I'm not warranted by Interpol or anything like that. So the typical things where basically says I'm a good citizen. Just give me my registration back, or just extend it.
Yeah.
But since we talked, before you start talking about the other stuff, let me just share my experience with the RSE, because that was a quite funny anecdote as well. It happened while I was at Siemens, and because my English was relatively good at the time, that I think that was after. Yes, it was after my first stint in Australia, so my English was probably above average for Siemens in Germany. And I always had a knack for training and basically knowledge sharing and so on. So very often when there were international visitors, I was basically to look after them and show them around and explain things to them. So I was a bit like a tour guide or something like that. And there was one visit from the RSE, which was a group of 3 gentlemen, the previous IRSE president, the current IRSE president, and the incoming IRSE president. So they came in a group of 3. It was almost like a handover meeting that they combined with a technical visit to Siemens. So we had a look at the Siemens facilities in Braunschweig in Germany, that you know well. And then we went on a high-speed train, and we went out to a test facility or to a pilot line for ETCS, which is south of Berlin. And while we were on the train ride, we just had a chat, and inevitably one of the 3 asked me, well, Frank, are you a member of the RSE? And I said no at the time, because the RSE in Germany was all but non-existent at the time. So I said no. And then, of course, they convinced me to become a member. So one of the 3 guys just opened this briefcase, pulled out an application form in paper. It had wrinkles all over the place. There were coffee stains on it and everything. And they basically put this in front of me and had me filling it in on the spot, on the train while we were traveling. Yeah. And then we came to that thing, well, what membership level should I apply? And most people really go the hard way. Like they start as an associate member, and then like 20 years later, they upgrade to member, and then another 20 years later, when they're due for retirement, they may upgrade to fellow. So in my case, that everybody said, well, Frank, you can explain your signaling stuff so well, you're so knowledgeable, you need to apply straight for fellow. There's no question asked, you got to go for fellow. I would have never dared by myself, but I mean, those 3 guys were pretty convincing, so I did it. And then there was this discussion going on whether or not this application would be accepted, like on a piece of paper with some scribbly, with a ball pen, and the train was like shaking. I mean, not much. The high-speed trains in Germany run pretty smooth, but there's still some kind of movement. So my handwriting was not the cleanest one of all times. And then there were the coffee stains and the wrinkles of the paper and so on. And one of the guys said, This is a real test. This is a real test for our membership committee in London. So whether they can accept an application on the merits and not how the paper looks like and whether there's a coffee stain on it. So they basically took it as a case study to get it through the system. And I mean, sure enough, I got my fellowship. So as I just started off straight away as a fellow of the RSE. I think that was in 2004 or so. And then the chartered status I got. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I needed to get my professional accreditation when I came to Australia, because as you probably, I came over on a skilled independent visa, which means you have to demonstrate your professional competency as an engineer. So I had to go back to my university in Germany and basically have my diploma and my doctorate translated, and basically have them explaining that what's called a diploma in Germany is not the same as a diploma in Australia, which is much less. it's really, it's
Yes.
like a master's degree in Australia. So to really make it
Yes.
make it comparable, because otherwise, if you say diploma, you think that's something you get straight after high school or something like that. Yeah. So
Yep.
so that worked, and on that basis, I got my professional accreditation, and then it wasn't too much of a step to go through chartered status. Basically, you need to still, you write your career episodes and all kinds of stuff, and you need to be a bit creative there. So the mere, I mean, not creative by inventing stuff, but more creative, like how can you write it in the way that you demonstrate your competencies in a way that is obvious and acceptable for the auditor, for the guy that reviews the thing and gives you the accreditation. Yeah, so it's not making things up, but just presenting it in a suitable way. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah. That's an interesting story. Yeah. So you and I both fellow then.
It was quite funny, yeah, because I basically became a fellow reasonably early. And especially if you really go the hard way, yeah, if you start applying after 5 years in a career, you can't go for fellowship anyway. I mean, at that time when we did this, I already had 13 years in the industry. I worked in 3 different continents, and so I did have a lot of experience, and I basically demonstrated it by explaining to those guys pretty much everything that happened on the location Braunschweig. And there's a lot of stuff happening in Braunschweig. So being able to explain most of that is already a qualification in itself, you might say. Yeah. So but so back to your case, you didn't leave it there, right? I mean, normally you have your FIRSE, your fellowship in the RSE, which is your home institution, as you say, or for your professional discipline, as is for me.
Yeah.
And then you've got your chartered status, and this where most people would say, okay, well, thanks very much, we leave it there. But you had your eyes on some bigger targets, haven't you?
I did indeed, yeah. So at the same time as I applied for the IRSE, I did also think I need something that's globally, within and outside of the industry to be recognised. So that's why I actually went in at a member level of the IET, and I got that, which was really, really good. But then my focus turned on, if I look at what I've done in my career, as much as my home ground was comms and signalling, over time, I've progressed into more broader engineering. And as I've done that, it dawned on me that it would be really good and important, I think, to get some recognition of some of what I call the full roundedness of becoming what I call a railway person. So I got my IRSC fellowship there, systems, so I tick on that one. And then I do an awful lot of work and from an engineering perspective with our colleagues in infrastructure builds. So the next thing that seemed logical to me was the Permanent Way Institute. Now, a lot of people may think, well, Permanent Way, that's just track and rail, isn't it? And a lot of people do think that. And if you look at it, that's fundamentally, you look at the badge, is what it says.
Including me, absolutely. That's always what I thought. The track people,
Yeah, but they're actually broader than that now. And if you actually go to their website and you look at it, they actually call themselves, it's the Permanent Way Institute, and it says the Institute of Railway Infrastructure Engineers. And what they mean by that, and I've talked to them quite a bit, and obviously I've actually, the current president is a very good friend of mine, and I knew him back in York, in the days of what was then Railtrack, and his background is not civils at all in that sense. He's OHW and traction systems. So they're much broader. They're no longer, as much as their name and everybody thinks of them, they're just track people. They're well beyond that, and that's what drove me to say I really need to be try and get a fellowship of that, because that for me then is part of the full engineering, from an engineering perspective, if you like, systems and infrastructure. And so I was driven to do it. And I got that one. Also, I think it was just before Christmas. Yeah. So then the next thing was, so I was a fellow of the Institute of Railway Signalling Engineers and a Permanent Way. And I thought it would be really good to get my membership up to a fellow in the IAT. But at the same time, I looked at what makes a railway these days. And all too often, and we're all guilty, I've been guilty for a long while, but in the last maybe 10 years or so, I've become more and more aware of the role of the operator in railways. And we engineers, we think we know it all, but we actually don't. I can remember in the early days I used to complain about, well, why do I need to go and talk to the operator? You know, I know how to build railways, we know what to design, and the operators always want things that they don't need, et cetera, et cetera. Over time, you learn the error in your ways if you carry on down that route. You very much need the operator in anything that we build. The fundamental, right from the outset, is the concept of operation. How are you going to operate this? Engineers can't do that. They need the operator to give that input. How's he going to run the railway? And it becomes even more important. The more automated we become, the more important the input from the operator is. Not for normal operations, but it's when it all goes wrong. You know, they're the ones that's got to manage that railway. Yeah. And if you haven't got their buy-in and how they're going, now this is how it works, yeah, but fundamentally, how does it not work? And when it doesn't work, you know, this is what we want to do, and this is how we want to achieve it, keep the operations going. And so the role of the operator is becoming more and more relevant. And I think if you have a look at projects, and when projects go wrong, they go wrong if you don't get the operator input early enough.
Yes.
Because then it starts to go wrong, or then you have the arguments of trying to hand over an asset that you've built that the operators go and say, well, I can't operate that. That doesn't do what I want it to do. And it's painful.
But it's difficult sometimes. So what I often found when I dealt with operators, like in the planning for the next generation of signaling systems, for example, these days, if you look at the systems engineering approach with your V model, you start in the top left-hand corner with your user requirements, and the user at the end of the day is basically the operator. So you need to start engaging, as you said, very, very early with the operator, almost the first people that need to give their inputs. And an important document that forms part of these user requirements is something called the concept of operations. Now, if the problem that I saw, or that I found in trying to gauge this out of an operator, is that, for one, many operators, they haven't really thought about formalizing how they operate the railway. They just know how it works, you know. But if they need to bring it down to paper, this is very complicated, and it's even more difficult, if not impossible, if you want them to think forward to a signaling technology that they have never seen, right? So they basically need to imagine a future with a more sophisticated train control technology that they have zero experience with. And it's this old saying, if you ask people in a control center how the future control center will look like, they will get you a precise image of the new coffee machine, including the manufacturer and the type and the size and the number of cups per hour and everything. But if it comes to the function of the actual rail system, they're often blank. And the other problem I found is that operators operate. So their daily business is to keep the trains running. So if you need to get them make time for writing up how operations will look like in the future, like 10 years from now, very often they said, I love to do it, but I don't have time because I need to keep the trains running like today in the next 5 minutes, and not so much what's happening in 10 years. I can hardly plan forward what I'm doing in a month, let alone in 5 years or 10 years from now. So I'm not sure what your experiences are on this front, but I found it as important as it is to include the operators and engage them in a process. It's often quite an uphill battle to really motivate them, and even if they see the necessity to facilitate for them to make time for this. And more often than not, they basically refer back to consultants, and then you have a third party writing out the concept of operations, and then it may lead to a situation where much later in the process, you build your system according to that ConOps, and then at the end of the day, the operator gets the ready product, and they say, "Oh, wait a minute, this is not quite what
that's
we
not
had
what I
in mind."
wanted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how do you think can this be addressed?
So I guess the answer is patience to a certain degree, and I've seen that in projects not that long ago, where you're right. A lot of the times you'll see clients and they say we've engaged a shadow operator, which is fine. Yeah. They are operational people. They've got an operational background, but they still fundamentally aren't going to have got any ownership of the end product that's ultimately designed and built and handed over to the real operator. And I guess it's really all about, and I've seen it in a very recent project now, which is going to go to the market fairly soon, that they've actually broken aside the operator requirements. It's a new piece of railway. And that's going to be the first contract that they let. So they're actually going to get the real operator before he's got a railway to actually operate, to sit down and do the concept of operations and develop the requirements that go into the subsequent infrastructure and systems requirements to go into those contracts.
Well, that's interesting.
And I think, sorry?
That's interesting. Is that Sydney Metro?
Yes. It's one of the West is going very much.
Yeah, I thought it must be Metro West. That's an interesting idea, because in the previous contracts for Sydney Metro, they had this concept of a shadow operator, which is quite common if you haven't let the contract for your operator. And very often in big projects like this, you basically have a huge consortium where you have an operator on board, you've got technology providers on board for the trains, for the rail systems, for everything. You've got bankers on board that are basically responsible for all the financing aspects if you have a public-private partnerships and stuff like that. And this is not something that you basically do on day one. And that's why you, as a client organization, you start drawing up the concept of operations with a shadow operator. Yeah, but as you said, you always have the risk that what's written down there may not be exactly what the eventual operator may want. So either you need an iteration where you need to kind of adjust this and basically modify the initial concept of operation that it fits into the way the actual operator wants to do things. Or what you just said, well, that's obviously a very interesting thing, which on the other side have downsides. So you're basically you have, instead of this whole package of operator, technology provider, banker, and so on, you basically carve out the operator and disconnected from all the other stuff. So I'm
it's
not,
kind
I'm
of
not sure. From formulating the operational objectives in the way that the operator actually wants it, that's certainly second to none. That's a much better approach. But I'm not sure about possible downsides of basically separating the operator from all the other guys who need to build the stuff. I can't tell. I'm not saying there's a risk. I'm just saying need to be seen. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that they're also doing this partnering arrangement, so that everybody is a partner, including the client and all the different packages, and the operator will be a partner in that. So I think they won't be disconnected. I think it's more about influencing some of the outcomes, shall we say, and how they're developed. When I heard it, I thought, I like that. Now, time will tell whether it works, but it's certainly got good merit, I think. Will there be arguments along the way? Of course there will. I mean, an operator, there will always be those challenges where an operator wants far more than he's, and no, you don't need that, you don't need this, etc. But at least you'll have those discussions and those robust debates early on, right at the outset.
I'm actually very curious, talking about Metro West in Sydney, whether they will end up with one of the two operators they already have identified, or whether they will end up with a third one. Because one of the benefits of Sydney Metro having segregated standalone lines that are connected to a network via interchange stations, but operationally they are completely segregated. And one of the benefits is that you are able to choose different operators and different technology providers, for that matter, for different lines. And I always thought this is an advantage, because if you are an organization like Sydney Metro responsible for an entire network, and you are basically 100% dependent on a single operator, that may not be the best outcome in the long term. And you compare this with other networks, for example, Singapore, who has been very, very successful in bringing a second operator in, which is SBS Transit, and then basically having the incumbent operator as SMRT, Singapore Mass Rapid Transit, and SBS Transit, and basically playing them against each other for an overall higher quality for the entire network. I found this quite impressive, and it seems that Sydney Metro is kind of following that concept. So they had MTR as the operator of the first line, Northwest, and now City and Southwest. But now for the line to the Western Sydney Airport, they chose RATP, the French operator from Paris Metro, as the operator. And I guess if they played smartly going forward, they will probably start comparing or benchmarking, shall we say, MTR and RATP against each other. And there were certainly other operators with an appetite as well. So one of the operators that didn't win the Western Sydney Airport was SMRT from Singapore, what I was just talking about. And so they have an appetite to do something in Sydney. So I'm really, really curious what's happening on Metro West, whether they introduce a third operator, which would go beyond what Singapore is doing, or whether they say, no, wait a minute, we've got those two pre-qualified, shall we say, operators already, which is MTR and RATP. Let's just choose between those two.
Yeah. I mean, my gut would say, I mean, if you ask them, they'll say it's open, and I think it is open. Actually, I think they would not balk at a third operator if it was the right choice, and certainly that project offers you that opportunity.
Yes.
And then I think it's even better, as I said, when I read it, because I did a bit of reading on it and asked a few questions. But the concept of having the operator element let first, I quite like that. I quite like that.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely a very innovative approach. So and it's different from what they've done for the first two lines. So maybe they had a look at this and said, okay, well, there are certain shortcomings, and maybe choosing the operator upfront may be a better concept than working with the shadow operator again. That's
I mean, the shadow operator is fine, and look, let's not knock it. I'm sure they get 90% of the way there.
Yeah.
But it's still not the operator that's got to operate that railway.
Yes.
And I think
I wouldn't. I
concept.
wouldn't knock it. I wouldn't discount it, because this is still the way that most new metros will operate, or that operate not is the wrong word here, but this is how most new metros will approach it, by choosing a shadow operator, which basically fills in as long as they haven't contracted the eventual operator that will actually do the railway operations. Yeah. So it's a proven concept. And to me, it sounds more like an experiment in Sydney to see how it compares if they do it this way rather than that way. Yeah. So
Yes.
it's an innovation, and I think it will be very interesting to see how this pans out. Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and I'm keeping a good eye on it, but a positive one, because when I heard it and I thought, I like that. I do like that. Because it became, we're almost gone full circle there. The role of the operator is critical. And you ask the question, they're very busy people and they've got a day job, and how do you get them involved? Well, that's certainly one way of doing it. When your day job is actually developing your concept of operations that you are dictating for the railway, that you will input into and ultimately inherit and operate.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And really integrating the operator properly is almost an art form. There are so many ways where you can do it wrong, to the extreme of completely offsiding the operator, like basically treating them like, okay, well, an afterthought. And I don't know. I mean, I can't help myself like mentioning this example from Queensland, from Brisbane, where they basically had the initial responsibility for the new ETCS signaling that they're doing on Cross River Rail was initially with Queensland Rail. And then like a year later, or 18 months later, they decided to take it away from Queensland Rail and give it to the new delivery authority for Cross River Rail. And what I heard through the grapevine was kind of, well, they don't really trust Queensland Rail in delivering projects like this. And I think if you really want to upset an operator, this is the way to do it. Yeah, like just tell them in the face that you consider them incompetent. This is what you need to do if you want to have a real interesting relationship with your operator going forward. Yeah, I'm wishing Brisbane all the best, and Cross River Rail is such an important project. So fingers crossed that everything goes well. But I think there is a fair risk that at some point towards the very end of it, when it comes to handing the whole stuff over to the operator, that someone in QR may say, I just waited for this point in time. Now let's see who is incompetent here, and let's see what we want to do. It will be interesting. Yeah. And
it will. And to be honest, Frank, they have got to, somehow or other, they've got to get the Queensland Rail back to give them the advice that is necessary to be able to sensibly build that railway.
Yeah. And I mean, I would never accuse QR of being malicious or so. I mean, they understand the importance of getting this piece of railway working. At the end of the day, it's becoming a part of their network. So it's basically their asset that's just being built by someone else, and they need it for their network. So they will be constructive, they will be collaborative. But I mean, people are people. People will remember this event, and people will just bear a grudge, whether it's a serious one or just one somewhere in the back of the head or so remains to be seen. But that was certainly a bit of an unfortunate turn of events. But generally, when I said involving the operators in art form, what I found in my training courses for CBTC, for ETCS, whenever I had operators in the room, I found that I got along with them very well. One, because I really put an effort in to explain to them how this whole new signaling stuff works. not just saying, oh, well, you are too stupid for signaling anyway, leave it to the signaling engineers. I really made a point of, no, you need to understand this. And I also made a point to make clear how this new technology will affect operations. So what the relationship is between that new piece of technology and their role in the organization. And I'm not saying I'm an expert or I'm perfect in doing it like this. So I was really thinking is if they are so appreciative and so grateful of my way of dealing with them, how many other people must be out there who treat them much worse than I do? So that's more the point. Not so my interaction with them is so fantastic. It's more like, well, my interaction is as good as I can make it, which is certainly not perfect. So, but how much worse must it be that most other people out there interact with the operator? That was really my concern or my aha moment. Yeah.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, Frank. And coming back to sort of your experience, I mean, the one thing that it's dawned on me is that more and more, I'll call them good friends, I've built in the last few years, particularly here in Australia, have been operators, and it's been like very eye-opening because if you get to see how they think, which is sometimes different to how we think. Engineers are very methodical, and we join the dots, and we just think it's just all logical, isn't it? Whereas an operator thinks from a different concept. And to actually talk to them and get their view on how railways work and how they should work, and as I said, I think earlier on, it's when they don't work, how you manage around that. It inspired me. It was that actually inspired me to say, I've got to go that next step now. And that's why I actually went for the fellow of the Chartered Institute of Railway Operators, because having spoken with them, having started to think a little bit more on their level, not just from a pure engineering level, for me, I needed that. That was my little, if you like, the three legs of the stool, because I did something not so long ago on LinkedIn on that three legs of the stool, and it's exactly that. It's systems engineering, infrastructure engineering, and operational management, and the three legs make the railway a stable stool.
Yeah, that was quite a nice image. So, I was going to come back to that as well. But the question I would have there is, I mean, you've certainly had your credentials in the field of railway signaling. So that's how you got into the RSE. You had your credentials and experience in the general field of engineering. That's how you got your chartered status. And you also explained your credentials in the field of railway infrastructure, and this is how you got into PWI. Yep. What were the demonstrable credentials you had in the field of rail operations?
So it's actually quite interesting because anybody who loves their railways and see themselves as engineers, I would recommend you to try and go for to become a member, at least, if not a fellow, of the Chartered Institute of Railway Operators, because it is worthwhile doing, and actually, for me, it gives you that rounded feeling. And what it was, it's when you apply that it's the same as all the other institutes. You know, you've got forms to fill out, and it's how you demonstrate that you understand how you demonstrate that you are competent to do what you're seeking to do, which is how you and I for the IRSC, same with the PWI, with all the infrastructure builds. With the Chartered Institute of Railway, Institute of Railway Operators, when you actually get what they're looking for, you then start, as I know you mentioned before, it's not telling a story, it's starting to relate your experience and how have you thought about the concept of operations in what you've done, and so that they're a little bit different because effectively they want quite a detailed CV from you, but then but they want that CV to be marked with, they've then got a whole list of things that they want you to demonstrate that you've done to prove that you can be either a member or a fellow. And it also, interestingly, they want elements of it has got to be from an international perspective. So it's not just one country. You've got to either demonstrate you've done it internationally, or you don't have to have travelled, but you've been involved in other operational railways. And that was quite interesting. So it helped a lot. For me, it was when we did, I did it on Canberra Light Rail because we had to do that as part of the PPP on the client side. And we did it also very much so on City Metro, on City and Southwest. We spent oodles of time with the operator and trying to get the end product, one, fit for the purpose of what it was intended to operate the railway, but also because it was an augmentation of the City and Southwest into an existing railway, the challenges that came with that. And so the role of the operator and the input became more and more intense. And I was able to demonstrate that. And it changed my thinking a little bit in some of the engineering that we did. Yeah. And then the other one I did a little bit on was when I worked on Mecca Medina High Speed in Saudi. Again, the same thing. So it's amazing, if you're an engineer, how much you do with respect to operations, but actually if you apply to become a member of it, it really makes you start to realize, and that's what drove me to write that article, by the way, realize how inherently important the operator input is into everything that we do. And it won't change you as a person, but it will change your concept of how you view what you do sometimes.
I'm not. I was about to agree with everything you just said, and then you said something with that. No, I'm not quite agreeing with that one. You said it doesn't make you a better person, but I do think that if you endeavor to think more the way of an operator and to put yourself in the operator's shoes, I do believe you become a better engineer. I do think that your technical work does actually become better compared to others who just say, well, I just want to do my technical solution and because it's so fantastic, it will work. Regardless of what the people who actually have to work with it say about that. Yeah,
correct.
And you have these guys with the blinkers on, and they don't want to see left and they don't want to see right. They basically think all I need to do is basically build it 100% to specification, and then things will be fine. And very often things will not be fine if those specifications are not 100% aligned with what the operator actually wants and needs. And very often, coming back to my much earlier point of this discussion, is very often the operator themselves don't really know what they want. They know what they wanted in the past from the existing signaling system, but that doesn't necessarily mean they know what they will want in the future from the new technology. But this new technology is what the entire concept of operation is written about. It's not just writing down how do you run the railway today. It's about how will you run your railway tomorrow or in 5 years' time or whenever that new system will go into service. And that's something that many operators struggle with. And mind you, that's not just rail operators. This is everybody struggles with. Yeah. One of the most difficult questions in my life was when anybody asked me, well, be it my partner, my wife, my good friend or whatever, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And I just said, but I really struggled to imagine myself where I will be in 5 years. So I'm more the kind of person, well, if I keep doing the right things and working towards certain objectives, then it will lead me on a good path. And in 5 years from now, I will be in a good spot. But whether that good spot is still in Perth, Australia, or whether it's back in Germany, or whether it's on Fiji, who am I to
Yeah,
know? Yeah, what do
yeah,
you know? What life throws at you? Yeah. So
absolutely.
I think on an individual level, and I don't think that's just me. I think on an individual level, everybody struggles to imagine a future um, of something that they have never seen before, where they simply don't have a reference. It certainly helps, especially in the field of rabbits. I mean, CBTC has been done before in the world for the last 40 years. Yeah. So there are plenty of operators out there where you can travel to, which you can visit, which you can get on Zoom calls, where you can read about and so on. So there are ways to get an idea what other railways have done with this kind of technology. So it's not like completely new. Nobody has ever done this before. It's more like nobody here has ever done it before, but in other places it was done before. So we just need to get some inspiration, if you will, from other operators. But
Yep.
still, that requires a lot of effort, and it also requires a lot of imagination. Whether something that's doable in Singapore can also be doable in Melbourne or in Sydney or in Brisbane or whatever. Yeah, and not just focusing on the differences, but more on the, like, okay, how can we transfer this over to us? Now, I can
Yeah.
imagine where we just had, there was something many years back where German Rail and Network Rail came together. So the operators from Germany and from the UK. And I think the name of the game was to see, German Rail at the time did a lot of stuff with exit counters. And that was the old
Yep.
exit counter versus check circuit discussion and signaling. And German Rail started relatively early to do lots and lots of stuff with exit counters, including in stations, which for the UK
Yep.
at the time was a complete novel concept. So there was a delegation from the UK traveling to Germany, basically talking to German Rail about how they do exit counters and whether that's something that they could imagine doing in the UK. And I recall them going back to the UK with the conclusion, they are very different than we are. Like,
Yeah.
but interestingly enough, a few years later or since then, the UK has actually adopted exit counters on quite a significant scale. So there must have been something rubbing off from that visit in Germany. But the initial impression really was, okay, well, this is definitely not one-on-one transferable from Germany to the UK. There are just too many differences. And I could
Yeah.
imagine the same thing will happen if an operator here in Australia comes from a conventional signaling system, goes into new technology, be it advanced ETCS, be it CBTC, looking at other railways and then saying, oh yeah, well, but that's completely different. Yeah, they operate in a completely different way without realizing that once they have the new technology, they will also get to operate in that new way, as railways do operate with that new technology if they want to do it right. Yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. And look, I wholeheartedly agree with everything you've said there. And you know, to a certain degree, it's those kind of things that where evolution comes from, because you've got to have that change. Oh, no, I can't make that work. And then they go away, and then they eventually they do evolve and they use that. I mean, you're seeing that very thing happening up in Queensland at this moment in time on that very project that you talked about. That they've got technology that's been introduced, which is quite normal for most parts, platform screen doors and all of those, which and even an underground railway, which is novel for them. But they will adopt it, and they may adopt a slightly different approach to it because operators do. But they will gain from what's going on around the world. And coming back to what you said in terms of, I said it didn't change me. It hadn't changed me as a person. Making that effort to get closer to understanding operators and how they think and want to operate a railway has changed me in my mindset. That's all.
Yes.
I'm still the same person, but my mindset is somewhat different.
But are you really still the same person if you changed your mindset? This is getting very philosophical now. I'm aware of this, but I tend to argue that if you change your mindset, if you change the way you think with all these relationships like mind and body, how it fits together, I'm very convinced that it's going to change you as a person as well. Probably even going down to the DNA. And it was funny when you said earlier, Reves in your DNA. I was just imagining these DNA spirals, and on Steve's DNA, there are little trains running on those spirals. Yeah, that's
I like that. Yeah. No, you're probably right. But I guess if you look at me as a person, I've always been very open-minded, and I'll listen, if you know what I mean. I don't just talk, I actually listen. And if I get things wrong, I'll put my hand up and I'll say I'm wrong. And I'll love challenge, because I think it's important that people challenge you as an individual. So that's why I might do things slightly differently now, but it won't change me as a person, because I've always been very open-minded about listening to people.
Yeah.
And you know, the best people I learn from these days are the young people. There's some amazing, innovative people around in this industry, and yes. I love dealing with them.
Yes. Well, yeah, definitely. I think it's important. You mentioned open-minded, which is certainly very important in order to get to the next step, which means putting yourself into someone else's shoes. And it may be the shoe of an operator, it may be the shoe of an infrastructure builder, it may be the shoe of a supplier. I think, or I've been thinking for a while, that one of my, call it superpowers as a consultant, is that I work both in the supply industry and on the client side, and you did the same. So it's not just me. But I'm one of the people who definitely understand the thinking on both sides, and can basically translate what the one side says and the other side may understand very differently. You can basically translate them. What they're actually saying is this. Yeah. And I think that's extremely helpful. And this is only possible because I spend so much time in the mindset of a signaling supplier, because I was a signaling supplier. I worked for a signaling supplier. So I've seen it from the inside, how things work there and how certain practicalities are that you don't see from the outside. We just say, well, there's a standard and they say they are compliant, so it must be 100%. Whoa, wait a minute. Maybe not quite, because the 100% also requires a certain budget that may not be available. And this is where some corners get cut, and then maybe what they claim to be 100% may not quite be 100%, and so on. But it all comes from an emphasis for somebody else's position, but that requires the open mind that you were talking about. So if somebody has a closed mind, then this kind of emphasis will be very, very hard to achieve. Yeah.
And Frank, I mean, you're very right. And I often have many conversations with younger people. I mean, as you get older, you spend more time mentoring, which is a good thing. It's your payback, if you like, for everything that the industry's given to us over the years, and we owe the industry something. And so I find mentoring. I love doing mentoring. And I've been often asked the question, by people going, well, do you think I should go into the private sector for a while? And I'm going, absolutely you must. You absolutely should. I mean, the game changer for me was when I stepped out of the privatised British Rail, which became Railtrack, and for the first time went to Balfour Beatty and then into Siemens as a supplier. It opens up your mind. And then... And there's an old saying, and I think you nearly said it, but it's certainly a British saying, which is, and you don't know how the other person is thinking until you've walked a mile in the other person's shoes. So, and you may think you're talking the same language, and you may think that what's important to you is important to the client and vice versa, but there are completely different drivers. Which mean you're not aligned. It doesn't mean to say you can't be aligned, but you have to understand where that gap is and when they say something, where they're coming from. And unless you've done both sides, you really can't get it.
Yes. Yes. So I agree. Also some variety in the career is definitely helpful. I mean, it's not absolutely necessary. I mean, there's certain cases, plenty of cases where somebody just stays in a certain profession and they just stay like this all their life, and that's okay. But if you, I think if you really want to stand out, if you really want to have an extraordinary career, it helps a lot if you really get into those different places and you gain those different perspectives, because it just makes your experience, your body of experience more rounded, more comprehensive, and more more sophisticated as well. I think that you just have more tools in your toolbox than if you hadn't done it. So you're not tempted to take a set of pliers to drive a nail into the wall if you also have a hammer in your toolbox, and you know from experience that all the guys that are good with nails, they are using the hammer and not the set of pliers.
Yep.
So
and I think the other thing what it does is, and again, it's a conversation I have quite often when I'm mentoring people, is understand what's really important to you. If you're on the client side, or if indeed you're on the supplier side, understand the absolutes that is important to you, but then be broad enough and wide enough to understand there's things that you would like, but you don't need them. And so it comes then, fight the battles that you fight them wisely. There will be battles that you could win, but it's probably in your best interest not to, because you don't need to win it. You could win it, but that gives something to the other side that is probably very important to them. And then your arguments become less and less and become very focused, and you never get rid of arguments full stop. But
what I think, and that's a slightly different aspect from what you just said, or maybe an additional aspect of what have you, is I think it's important to kind of write the story of your own career, or paint a picture of your own career. So I really liked your description of this three-legged stool, which seems to be a very good model. Whether it's a complete model or even a comprehensive model, I don't know, but it seems plausible. It seems kind of comprehensive, and it certainly does make a lot of sense in relation to the steps that you have done on your project Self-Esteem, where you said, okay, well, as far as I can see it, these are three key components that are the pillars of the complete railway system and the successful railway system, and therefore I am striving to achieve a formal recognition in those three areas. And this is an example what I mean by writing your own career story, or painting your own career picture, that you're thinking about how do your activities, your different jobs over a period of time fit together. How do they form a picture, and how does this picture look like? Is this the picture that you want, or do you recognize, well, there are actually, to make the picture complete, there are some missing bits, so maybe I start filling this in. Like I worked 20 years on the supplier side, and then I said, you know what, I don't really know very much how the client thinks. So I was basically embracing the opportunity to work on the client side for the first time. And it was really eye-opening, because the first thing that I did client side, I was thrown into a procurement process. So when I joined, the first day I joined was the day when the tender documents went out to market. So I wasn't involved in writing the tender documents, but from then onwards, I was involved in everything else. So I saw the responses coming back from the supply industry, the same supply industry that I used to work in. So previously, I was the one sending back those tender responses. And now I sat on the receiving side, and I had a look at this. And all of a sudden, I thought, well, I can understand why they've written it like this, but this is not really what I wanted to see. And so basically seeing both sides of the coin suddenly, and to me that was a real important addition to my career, to my overall perspective. And then over time, I basically honed this a bit more to say, okay, well, to really be in a position of building this bridge between those two camps, I need to make sure that the client side understands the supplier side better as well. So it's not just well, the suppliers are just ignorant when it comes to understanding the client. No. This is too one-sided. It's also that many people on the client side who always were client side are pretty oblivious on how the supplier thinks and what the suppliers need to get involved, to get motivated, to perform properly. Yeah, I talked about it this morning in a meeting where I said I did a procurement activity once on the client side where I basically wanted to gauge information out of the supply market. And they basically said, this is not going to work. They won't respond. They won't get motivated. And because of my supplier network, I basically set it up in a way that satisfied all the internal procurement rules on the client side, but which also led to a 100% response rate from the supply market. And the client was flabbergasted. They said, how did you do that? But we would have never expected that they come back 100%. Well, this is because once I had the network on the supply side, and two, I knew what was necessary to motivate the suppliers, like not threatening with a stick and not just having a carrot, but actually explaining to them what's the idea here and what's in it for them, what's the benefit for the suppliers to respond to this inquiry, what's in it for them, not just it makes the client happy, so just go and oblige, but really what's their own benefit for it. And this understanding of both sides to try to create a win-win. Everybody's talking about win-win, but when it comes to really create a real win-win, not just, well, I win and the others get a few breadcrumbs, but no. The others think they have won, and I think I have won. That's the real win-win. Yeah, and creating something like this, it really requires the emphasis, the understanding of both sides, and also a bit this give and take. Like, where do I need to compromise and give something away so that the other side wants to collaborate, wants to cooperate?
Correct.
Yeah,
and that relates back to what I said. The battles you can win and the battles the ones that you must, and the ones that you can but are prepared to give away. That's your compromise, because it's seen as a win for them. And at the end of the day, you get that win-win. It doesn't come naturally. You have to work at getting that win-win situation. And you're absolutely spot on. Once you've got you've been on both sides of the fence and you understand how they think, it makes it so much easier. And that's why I would always recommend, particularly those that are career-minded and they want to move forward, do both things. Yeah. And if you've been on the client side, it seems like a leap into the dark to go onto the supply chain side. But you get so much benefit from it. Yeah. And in return, if you're a supplier, spend some time on the client side, because they are intelligent people and they want best outcomes, but they don't always know how to get it.
Yeah. And it can be in the same organization. So you don't necessarily have to change organizations. So what I found always interesting whenever I heard about it is that particularly in England, there was a habit of having managers of the railway organization spending some time on the coalface, on the stations, talking to passengers, basically doing the passenger service and dealing with complaints from the passengers, really understanding where the pressure points for the passengers are. And that activity basically made them better managers to better do their daily job in the railway organization with a better understanding of the passengers. And it's the same in a railway organization. So say you work in the control center, which means you're very close to operations. But then maybe it also makes sense if you have worked in project delivery for a while. So to get a better understanding with your operational understanding, what are the pressure points and the bottlenecks for the guys building that stuff, delivering the projects? which then again makes you a better operator because you just create a mutual understanding. Yeah. And
yeah.
yeah,
I wholeheartedly agree with you. And which is why, coming back to an earlier conversation, the one thing it's dawned on me is when we talk about operators and the creatures that they are, the reason why I've befriended so many of them is they're actually quite, they're very good at what they do. That you can't put them into a little corner and say this is what operators do. They actually are quite competent, capable people these days.
Yeah.
And their input is really refreshing sometimes.
Yes. And I've always seen it when I worked as a consultant for basically planning for new signaling systems and stuff like that. One of the aspects how I saw my role is basically helping the operator to transfer their competency from the old world into the new world, which requires different capabilities and to some degree different skill sets. But from a quality perspective, the idea was really to make them as good, as competent in the new world as they used to be in the old world. And for that, they require help. They require guidance. They require education. They require explanation. They require involvement. They basically need to be guided from point A to point B, from one end to the next. And but it benefits the entire railway because at the end of the day, you can build the most sophisticated systems. If the operators can't operate them properly, the outcome will be substandard.
Yep. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I can quote numbers of examples where from an engineering perspective, we were going to do something and the operator said, well, actually, I don't need that. And they'd come up with a much more cost-effective, simple solution, which worked for them. And we were going merrily down the road of over-engineering something that wasn't required. And so it's our obligation as engineers to involve them and bring them along that journey. So and in return, they'll take you along a very similar journey where you learn as well.
Yes. Oh yeah. You can learn a lot of stuff, and I actually quite admire them because at the end of the day, the railway service is only as good as the operator behind it. And this is something where I'm really excited to see world-class operators from overseas coming into an operation such as Sydney Metro. And if you will, to an extent, we have the same thing in Melbourne. I mean, if you look at MTM, Metro Trains Melbourne, there's MTR involved as well. So you may say there's another world-class operator also working in Melbourne and improving operations there. So I think that's exciting. And I mean, looking at the time, it's probably a good idea to wrap it up here. I was actually thinking initially, we would come back to something like the famous mechanical gap fillers in Sydney Metro and how to deal with all these complicated systems with so many moving parts and dependencies and what have you. But I think it's probably quite good to just wrap it up here because we had a very nice, a very instructive conversation around this entire thing of operations and also how it fits together to form that three-legged stool with the rail infrastructure bit and the rail systems or rail technology bit. I found it a fascinating journey that you just did over the last 9 months or so, which really made me think and which really helped me widening my own perspective. I mean, I don't believe that I will just set out tomorrow to apply for fellowships in the PWI and in the CIRO, and I probably wouldn't get them anyway. But so I'm quite happy to stick with the accreditations that I already have because I think for my own career, for my own self-esteem, this is good enough.
Yep.
I was personally, I was quite happy to add one additional thing to my portfolio of accreditations, and that was the Fellowship of Engineers Australia,
Yep.
which again was given to me based on my achievements in the industry. And so I was very pleased about that. So that was one thing that was personally very important to me. And to me, that's basically rounding up the whole thing with the chartered status, the national registration as a professional engineer, the fellowship in Engineers Australia, the fellowship in the IRSE, Institution of Rail Signal Engineers. So basically all the institutions that are relevant to me personally, professionally, I have achieved the highest membership status. So for me, this is as good as it gets. And even though there may be other things out there, and you've just shown me a few, something I could aim for, but I don't necessarily have to. So I think this is also an important takeaway for everybody in the audience, to really think about not just striving for the best and shiniest and I want everything, but really picking and choosing the stuff that are most
what's important to you.
Yeah, most compatible with what you want to achieve in your career. And sometimes what's enough for one person may be different from what is enough for another person. Yeah. So.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely, Frank. I 100% agree with that. And just to wrap up from my perspective, one thing that made me quite pleased from that post that I did, I've had a number of people who contacted me and said they found it inspirational and they're doing their own particular project, Self-Esteem, which is nice. Which comes back to, and it will be different to what mine is, it will be different to what yours is what's your goal in life?
Yes. And mind you, inspiring other people is certainly always something positive. I think the world generally can use more inspiration. And if people just get inspired from what you do without you setting intentionally out to, I'm going to inspire people. I mean, you set this project out for yourself, for your own, well, you called it self-esteem, whatever it was. So you wanted to round up your professional accreditation. And if other people look at this and take it as an inspiration, this is fantastic. And if other people look at the stuff that I'm doing, be it this podcast here or my training courses or whatever, and they take some inspiration from this, then I think that's a good thing. So anything that can inspire other people with positive things, with like in advancing themselves in their own careers, in their own private lives or professional lives, is generally a good thing, because people who really are progressing in a positive way, they don't waste their time with like negative stuff, and there's more than enough stuff out there that you can waste your time with. So I think inspiration is generally a good thing. So thanks very much, Steve, for putting some more meat to the bone to explain how you got on that journey and what inspired you to do that. And I hope that there will be some of our listeners who also got inspired by that as well. My usual wrap up, if you like what you heard here, then check out the other episodes. And if you like the podcast in general, just be kind to your friends and colleagues and tell them about it, that this is a good thing for the railway industry in general. And having said all this, as usual, keep it simple and bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.
Hi, it's Doc Frank again, real quick before you head off. If you are a fan of communications-based train control, or short CBTC, there's an event coming up in September that you absolutely don't want to miss. It's the first virtual global CBTC conference. It's called CBTC World Summit 2023, and it's happening on the 20th and the 21st of September. There will be 3 sessions of about 6 hours duration each for 3 different global regions, one for Asia Pacific, once for North and South America, and once for Europe and the Middle East. So wherever you are in the world, one of those sessions will be during the daytime in your time zone, and you can watch it live for the full 6 hours with 6 presentations. The kicker about this is that all other presentations, including the ones from your own session, will be available for replay via recordings. So that means that if the other session should be in the middle of your night, you can still watch it on demand at a time that's more convenient for you and doesn't interfere with your good night's sleep. The conference is available for registration right now at my training portal under docfranktraining.podia.com/summit23. I repeat that, docfranktraining.podia.com/summit23. I'm putting a lot of effort into this conference. It will be an absolute blockbuster event, and I very much hope to see you there. Until then, keep it simple and bye for now. Hey, Doc Frank here, host of the Rebel Conversations podcast. Thank you for listening.